So today we're super excited to be talking to Gavin Bell, who is the author of the Carter Blake thriller series under the name of Mason Cross, which has been longlisted for awards such as the Theakston's Old Peculiar Crime Novel, Richard and Judy's Book Club, and the, I'm going to see if I can say it right, the McIlvany Prize. Is that right? McIlvany. Right. Oh, it was going to be something. And Gavin is also about to release Hunted under the pseudonym Alex Knight, which has already received rave reviews from the crime community, and that will be coming out on June the 25th, 2020, and we will be grilling about him about that very soon.
Yeah.
Hand over to Lauren.
Great. So first question we've got for you is, it's kind of a general one. And what inspired you to get into writing, and when did you do that? And how did you choose crime as your genre?
So I think I've always liked writing. Just from back in primary school, I loved writing stories, and even just sort of kind of discursive essays and things. That was always the part of school that I liked the most, was writing stuff. I remember in high school they had a punishment regime where if you forgot your gym kit, you would have to write a 1,000-word essay on sportswear. And the first time I did that, I actually found that I enjoyed writing the 1,000-word essay in sportswear more than I enjoyed gym. So I would deliberately forget my gym kit after that. But I just always loved writing. And I remember when family got the first computer, we, myself and a friend, used to write. Do you remember those choose your own adventure books where, you know, if you do this, turn to page 252.
Yeah.
If you do this, yeah, we wrote those and printed them out and sold them at school.
Wow.
So it was almost like an early foray into self-publishing, I guess. But just, yeah, always loved writing. And I kind of fell out of the habit when I was a teenager. And this is something you hear a lot from teenage boys as they stop reading books and they stop kind of being that interested in that side of things. And I kept reading comics, but I didn't really read many books for the whole time I was a teenager. And the thing that got me back into it was sort of family holiday in south of France, where it rained, I think, 70% of the time. And I was bored out of my skull. And the only books in the local bookshop that were in English were Stephen King books. So I bought basically all of the Stephen King books they had and worked my way through those in a few days. And that just reminded me how much I loved reading. And that was kind of how I got back into reading. And around that time, maybe the year after, that was when King brought out On Writing, which is an absolutely amazing book if you're an aspiring writer or just if you're interested in reading. And that reminded me how much I like writing. And there was a competition to write a short story in the back of that. And I think when I'd bought the book, the deadline was like 3 days after I'd got to the end of it. So I quickly bashed out this short story and sent it off, and didn't hear anything back. But again, that reminded me how much I loved writing stories. And from there on, I just kind of kept at it and kept writing short stories and seeing if I could finish them.
That's incredible. Also, the fact that, isn't it cool that in books they used to actually have a call to action like that? I really wish we should bring that back. That's such a cool idea.
Yeah.
It's so cool that you can have that collective experience of buying and responding to something at the same time. Imagine
if you bought it like 3 weeks after the deadline, you'd be so sad, wouldn't you, that you wouldn't be able to enter the copy.
I know, yeah. I can remember going to the post office on the day before it was due and sending it recorded delivery just to make sure it got there. So I've still got no idea if it actually made it there or if Stephen King hated it or what. So
he's keeping it as inspiration in his back pocket.
That's probably what it is, yeah.
I'll have to watch the stories closely and see if it comes out. So that was obviously when you started to get into writing, and it seems like you were quite happy to share your work fairly early on. When did you actually start thinking about going about getting published, and what was that journey like?
I don't know if I can remember when I first started thinking about getting published, but I guess from that starting point, that was writing to deadline and submitting something. So maybe it was just always sort of a natural product of, I've written a story, I want to show somebody. So I don't think there was ever a period where I was worried about sending stuff off, because I was always conscious that if you want people to read your work, you have to put it in front of them. So it was more sort of finding markets for it, because if you go back 50 years, there were all these short story magazines and all these places you could sell stories. These days, as you guys know, it's a tougher market for short stuff. So I was looking at competitions, looking at short story magazines and sending stuff off. and piling up, a list of glowing rejections. And eventually I got somebody that was dumb enough to publish one of the stories.
But
And
how old were you when you were sending them to those magazines? Was that just after your trip?
Sort of early 20s, I guess.
Amazing.
And the first one, I must have been sort of late 20s when that first one got picked up, and it actually got published in the Quick Reads book, the Sun book of short stories. And I remember them phoning me up and saying, "Oh yeah, we've selected it as one of, a dozen or so stories that's going to be in this book, and we're really sorry, the advance is only 50 quid." And I was like, "You're going to pay me to be in this? So wait a minute, you're going to put me in a book and I'm going to get a check for it? That's amazing." So yeah, so that was pretty incredible. And part of the deal with that was they had a sort of launch event in London. I can't remember where it was. I think it might have been Penguin. And I got to go down and do a panel with some of the other authors that were on there, and they had sort of fans to come and get signed copies of the books. And I just thought, yeah, I could definitely get used to this. So that was a cool little kind of almost like a win a be an author experience for a day. But it really sort of kind of spurred me on, and we think, yeah, maybe I should keep going with this.
That's brilliant. So it feels like you from the start felt quite excited about it rather than daunted about the challenge of getting your books out there and sharing them with the world.
I think so, yeah, probably foolishly, but it definitely helps to not mind too much about other people seeing your work.
And do you think that you, having won that competition, did you then add that to your cover letters when you were trying to get published? And do you think that helped lift you up a bit from the pile?
That probably would have been a good idea, but I didn't think of doing that. So, I didn't actually win the competition. I was shortlisted, and they printed all the shortlisted stories in the book, and I think one of the other ones won.
But still, shortlisting's amazing.
But yeah, and I just thought, okay, well that's quite good, and just kind of kept sending stories away and getting rejections. And I think the next sort of key thing that happened was I was in the car doing my second job. I used to deliver pizza evenings, which is actually a great job for a writer, but won't get sidetracked with that just now. And I think it was on the Radio 2 breakfast show. They had somebody from HarperCollins on just to talk about a new website they had launched called Autonomy, which is sadly not there anymore, but it was, I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it was an initiative they had, I guess, in the 2010s or the 2000s, where you could upload your manuscripts and people could read them and give you feedback. And it was, I guess, sort of early social media for writers. And the idea was the good ones would kind of float to the top, and I guess HarperCollins could skim off the good ones without having to go through an agent. But I just went on there and uploaded a few of my stories. So I didn't have a book, but I did have a dozen or so short stories. So I thought I'll just put them up there, and it's a bit like an album, and people can listen to it. And if they like the singles, they can read the rest of the album. And just kind of forgot about that. And months later, I got an email from the website saying that an agent had read a couple of the stories and was interested in talking to me. And that was kind of my really unusual route to getting an agent. And I haven't met any other writer who's had that easy a route into getting an agent. All the other writers I know have had to send off hundreds and hundreds of submissions and be rejected all over the place. And I just kind of got a good agent falling into my lap, which is not that useful advice for new writers. But
well, it is actually, because if you think about it, you did a lot of legwork before that event, so actually it's sort of a good way to remind people that the more you write and the more you send your writing out there, you're probably refining your writing as you went without really even thinking about it. So it's actually, I think it's quite a good, inspiring story in that way.
Yeah, I mean, and absolutely, the one sort of thing that's really important is I was putting my writing in front of people, and I didn't know that was going to be the route that somebody would notice me, but I was just trying to make sure that if I heard about new ways to get writing out there, I was taking advantage of them.
Amazing. And then in terms of your do you have a routine? Do you have a writing routine? I know you've also got a family, so you're probably a very busy man.
Yeah, it's probably a little tougher right now because everybody's at home, as we all are. So it's for me, the when I started to write longer work, at first it just seemed really daunting to think, how do I get enough words down to fill an entire book? A short story's 3,000 words, 5,000 words, a book's more like 80,000 words. And I just thought, how can I actually fill that much space? How can I find the time to do that? And I remember speaking to one of my friends and saying, you know, everybody says you have to write 1,000 words a day or 2,000 words a day, and I just don't have time to do it with family. Even at that point, I only had one kid, which I thought was difficult, but yeah, that was a breeze. But I remember the guy I was talking to just said, well, don't write 2,000 a day, write 500 a day. And when I thought about that, 500 a day, you can write 500 words in half an hour. But if you keep doing that, that's, you know, 3,000 words a week. It's, you know, 12,000 words a month, and it builds up. And in a few months, you've got enough words to fill a book. Chances are they're not going to be fantastic words, but you've got something to start with. So that's, even since, you know, since those days, that's been pretty much my routine, is I have to do at least 500 words a day. Most days I'll write more than that, because I have deadlines and people actually caring what type of words I write. But that's usually enough to get me going. If I say, right, I can, if, you know, I'm really not feeling like it today, I'll do 500 and stop. But more often than not, by the time you get to 500, you're in the groove and you can do a bit more. So that's kind of my routine, such as it is I'll try and do 500 a day and see where it takes me.
And what have you ever had any days when you can't, when you've got sort of like writer's block, or you're just really struggling? What would your tip be for people when they have those sort of days? Like, how do you get around it?
I think that the main tip is, don't beat yourself up about it if that happens some days. And some days just the world is going to conspire and sort of make it so you can't write. But I guess the trick is not to take easy excuses out of writing, and just if you can, just try and get a little bit done, even if it's not much, even if you think what you're writing's crap, because you can always go back and fix it, and it's usually not as bad as you think it is. I've seen a lot of writers talking about that. You have really good days writing and you have really bad days writing, but it's usually impossible to go back a couple of weeks later and look at the product of those days and tell which was a good day, which was a bad day. So I think if you're getting the words down, it's, yeah, you're making progress.
That's really, really practical and really inspiring there. And do you find that's the same for your idea generation? Do the ideas come to you, or do you have weeks or months or days where you just don't know where the next idea is coming from, or you can't get past a certain challenge in the book? How do you go about that process?
Yeah, I think that's, in a lot of ways, that's the toughest part about it, is just sort of hitting a wall where you don't know how to make the book do the thing that you need it to do. And it just, I wish I had a magic solution for that. The only thing, and it happens in every book, you always get to some point, usually halfway through, where you just think, this is terrible, I'm going to be found out, they're going to sort of tell me to go away and stop trying to write books again. And you've just got to kind of have faith that you will find a way somehow. And a lot of times that can't be forced. It's just time. It's just sort of trying to work away different aspects of it and hope that you find something that will let you have a breakthrough. I find it's quite good going for walks, or in the last couple of years I've been going for runs. And that kind of helps, just to be getting out, doing something physical where your mind's unoccupied. And sometimes I can come up with sort of solutions for problems I'm having when I'm out for a run.
If you're stuck on a plot point, would you ever ask like Fran, your editor, or would you ask anybody generally, or would you kind of keep it to you at that point?
Yeah, I mean, certainly if I get to the point where I'm sort of submitting usually I'll wait till I've submitted a draft to Fran, and I'll let her know I'm kind of struggling with a couple of elements here. And usually it's good to let them read it first, to let Fran sort of go through and read it, and she'll usually come up with the same points that she thinks need addressed that I do, which is always really comforting, because if it's stuff that you didn't even think was a problem, then that would be sort of much worse. But yeah, Fran's always really good at coming back with solutions for those things. And another person that's really good is my agent, and he's got a couple of people that work with him that will read through the books, and they're really good at coming back and giving advice or suggestions for things, and that absolutely can help, just getting a sort of second pair of eyes on it, particularly if somebody knows what they're doing and understands, you know, what you're trying to do with the book.
Do you have to be brave to sort of, or at least initially, to share those ideas with someone else, or is it just so important to get that fresh perspective that it's sort of an easy thing to do?
It's always kind of terrifying sending it off the first time, because at that point nobody has read it apart from you. So the scariest moments are usually when I send it to. I usually do this about the same time, where my wife Laura will read a draft and I'll send it to my agent. And I try to do that about a month or so before the actual deadline, so that they can feed back, and then it's not too terrible by the time I send it to my editor, Fran. But that's really terrifying because nobody's seen it, so it could actually be the worst book ever written until that point. So, and touch wood, so far they've come back and it's usually been fine. So it's always such a relief when they come back and say, yeah, this is okay. It's not the worst book ever written.
Yeah. Gosh, I think that's such a brave thing to share your baby with the world.
Yeah.
And what about your characters? Like how do you go about creating kind of real, meaningful characters that are going to survive across a series like you've done? Like, where do they come from, and how do you develop them?
I think without wanting to jinx it, the characters tends to be the bit that comes easiest. Because I struggle much more with the sort of mechanics of the plot and how to make things happen and get people into the right place. But once that's sort of attended to, the characters is just kind of thinking about how would a person like this deal with this situation, and as long as you're doing that and making sure that what they do and what they say fits into that character as you know them, which you should know them if you're writing them, that bit comes reasonably easy to me. Same with dialogue. That's the parts of the book that I tend to like writing the most, is just how the characters approaching this situation that I've chucked them into, and them sitting down having conversations with each other. That's something that I find I end up doing quite a lot in a draft of a book. Is at some point I will get so confused about the plot that I will put two of the characters into a room and they will sort of tell the plot to each other until I can kind of work out what the hell's going on.
That's amazing. How does that even look? Like, could you talk us through how that even works? Like, what do you mean? You literally write it down on a page as if they're talking about where they're
yeah. Well, I kind of write it as a scene, and it's a scene that I know is not going to make it to the final book. So, for example, right now I'm writing a scene which is, I think I've now sort of hit about 5,000 or 6,000 words in a chapter, which is probably about 10 times as long as my normal chapters, and it is literally two characters sitting in the coffee shop and one person in this gigantic pages long monologue explaining what has happened up until this point, and there's no way in hell that's going to make it to the final book, but it tells me what has happened to this character up until now, what she thought about these things that have happened, and I can then go back once I've done that and seed it back through the book in a way that's slightly less painful to read, hopefully, but it really helps me just get a handle on what's going on with the plot.
That's incredible. I've never heard anything like that. Have you, Charlotte? That's amazing.
No, I love it, and I also think I could do that as a side document for some of the books I read to really get into the character. Yeah. That's fascinating.
That really is. That is amazing. And so with somebody like Carter Blake, do you feel like he's now like part of you in terms of when you're writing him? Do you feel like, oh, I know what he'd do right now, so it comes to you really naturally?
Kind of. I'm sort of with all this sort of extra time in lockdown, I've got a sort of side book that I'm writing that's a Carter Blake one, and it's been really nice just to sort of slide back into his thought process. So yeah, I find him sort of quite comfortable to write. Also, I mean, people say, how much is your character like you? And I think most writers that write a series character, that character does tend to become a kind of core version of them, sort of that's sort of a bit taller and better looking and can fight people. So in a lot of senses, characters you write over several books do become more like you, I think.
And how have you managed, because that's obviously a very successful series, and now you're sort of branching out into something new, and as you said, Carter Blake is a comforting release as you tackle that. How have you found switching projects?
I think I've quite enjoyed writing standalones for the last couple, and it's kind of different advantages to them in a way. I mean, with the series book, you've kind of got a lot of the work done before you can come up with an idea for what the book's going to be about, because it's going to have Carter Blake in it, and it's going to be set in the States, and he's going to be looking for somebody who doesn't want to be found. So as long as it does all those things, then you can do what you like. With a standalone, it's a completely blank page, which is kind of equal parts scary and fun, just to know that you don't have to tick some of the boxes that you've had to do for the series, and you can do something completely different. So the first standalone I did was out last year. That was What She Saw Last Night, and that was the first book that I've written in the UK, despite sort of living in the UK. And it was just so different from writing the Blake books, because I had sort of female protagonist, and she was a normal person, so not somebody with a very particular set of skills, and it was set in places that I know really well. It was set in London and the Highlands of Scotland, and I thought that would all make it much easier to write, but in some ways it made it more difficult. I felt like I had to Google more stuff, and just think, oh, what tube line is it that goes there, and what is that street that I walk along in Glasgow every other day called? And it was kind of really weird, but it was such a different experience doing it. And yeah, I found it was quite fun doing something that was so different from the Blake books.
Yeah.
I guess that makes sense in terms of actually you would probably, I feel like I'd be the same, because if it's set in America, I feel like that people knowing the American street names in such a vast country is probably more rare than like people knowing the tube lines, isn't it? Because it's just like, people get so used to it, and you almost do it on autopilot when you go to work in London, so you don't always think about what tube you're getting on. That's so interesting.
There's that one step closer to home. I mean, how, obviously we're going to be launching this for Crime Week, so what do you think makes a great crime book and a great thriller? Like, what are the characteristics for you?
I think kind of what we were just talking about, the characters are the main thing. I want to read about interesting characters, and ones that I can relate to and that I find interesting and compelling. So I think if you get the characters right, as a writer and as a reader, I just kind of think of plot itself as kind of a necessary evil that you need to have there to have the book. But what I'm interested in is the characters and the situations that they're in. And the other kind of big thing that I need to start a book is that sort of that hook, that inciting incident of what is the mystery here, what is the story that is bringing these characters into it. So those are kind of the really key elements for me, is the characters and the hook.
And if you could write any other genre, or maybe you've already thought about this, what would you write?
So yeah, I never have an idea that doesn't involve a murder or crime of some kind. So I used to have a sort of pat answer for this, which is every story is crime.
Well, interesting. Why is that?
Well, I think if you look at sort of any, I was sort of sarcastic when I'm saying it, but if you
come on, I feel like we could really get. I feel like we could really answer
any story. I mean, Romeo and Juliet is crime. Sort of, Julius Caesar's definitely crime.
Yeah.
There's always some sort of transgression that's occurred to make things interesting. I think certainly in stories that I'm attracted to. So I think you can crime permeates a whole lot of different genres, whether it's historical or sci-fi or even romantic comedy. So I think whatever, if I did step outside the pure crime genre, it would probably still have to have some sort of mystery element. I've never had an idea that wouldn't really fit a crime book. I would love to, I love reading historical fiction. So I'd love to write something that was, set a couple of 100 years ago somewhere, or, in a really interesting historical period. But yeah, I just haven't had the idea to do that yet.
I feel like I could totally see that
crime in you.
Yeah, I could totally see. I really feel like that would be a great genre for you, historical crime. Yeah. I mean, so in terms of all of our aspiring authors out there who will be watching, do you have any tips for them, and especially tips during quarantine, getting your writing done in quarantine?
Well, okay, in some ways, a lot of people said you've got less excuse not to write in quarantine. There was all those tweets about, Shakespeare was quarantined and he wrote King Lear and whatever else. But, Shakespeare didn't have Netflix. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, because we're stuck inside, but, particularly if you've got a family, it's not going to be that life where you can just sort of sit around writing all day, even if you wanted to. So that's something I'm quite struggling with, is at this time of year, I'm usually at a point in a draft where I will sort of go away for a couple of days for a hotel and just really sort of blast through a lot of work on it and try and get it into shape. And that's kind of obviously not possible at the moment. And it's much harder to kind of focus that sort of time when you've got an 8-year-old coming in sort of asking who your favourite Ninja Turtle is. So,
which one is it? Just so we know.
Michelangelo, definitely.
Very important, very important.
I think that's the only one I can remember.
Michelangelo, you could go for a beer with. I mean, Raphael's cooler, but I think he'd do hard work.
He's kind of scary, isn't he, Raphael? Is he a scary one?
Yeah. Whereas Michelangelo's just, well, he is a party dude, isn't it?
Surely Raphael would fit with your crime, right? He would give you inspiration.
Raphael?
Yeah.
Oh, possibly, yeah. Yeah, I could probably bounce ideas off him. He would probably be more of a reader than Michelangelo. He's gone down a weird tangent.
And Gavin, we touched on it earlier, and you were talking about Stephen King and the kind of the influence that one of his books had on you. But are there any other authors, crime or otherwise, that really changed you or continue to influence you today?
I think it's certainly UK wise. It's tough to see past Ian Rankin. He is the boss, and particularly for writing in Scotland. The fact that there was this guy 40 miles away from me writing these amazing books, and it set them in places that I recognised, and they were every bit as good as the American writers that I liked. Was really inspirational. And there's so many great Scottish dark noir writers at the moment. Val McDermid and Denise Mina and all those guys. So love all that stuff. But Michael Connelly, I think every year he writes an amazing book. And I always look forward to reading the new Bosch book, or if he does a standalone, which I think he's just got a standalone out now. And the person I really wish would write another book is Gillian Flynn.
Yes, I think everyone does.
Yeah, that's one of my favourite books of the last 10 years, and just it's one of those annoying things where it was so successful that she doesn't really need to write another book, but yeah, I really wish she would.
And so, Gavin, could you tell us all where everyone could find you? I know you've got your different personas on some social medias and stuff, so we need to keep track. We'll put it all in the
I like to make it complicated to find me. So Mason Cross writes the Carter Blake books, and my website is masoncross.net, I believe. If you Google Mason Cross, you should get to it. There used to be another Mason Cross who had masoncross.com, who wrote erotica, but thankfully that dropped off the internet now. So I don't know.
That's a good heads up for the audience. We'll make sure we link to the right ones.
It was quite interesting when the first book came out and people would Google me and that would come up first, but thankfully that's I had to tell my grandmother-in-law, said, I found his website, and I was like, I don't have a website yet, and don't buy that book. And Alex Knight, who doesn't seem to have a sort of porn doppelganger so far, which is good. The website for that is alexknightauthor.com, I think. And the first book is Hunted, that's going to come out after that name. So we'll see how that goes, and maybe we'll have a completely different name next year.
We'll keep watching. But we're really excited to read Hunted when it comes out, so I'm sure we'll be back in touch with you then to review it.
Definitely. Thanks so much.
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been really great catching up.